Hi, if everyone could please take your seats, we'll begin momentarily. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And everyone has taken their seats. This is excellent. My name is Dr. Cassandra Emmons. I'm the Global Digital Democracy Advisor at IFES. I will also have the privilege of being your Master of Ceremonies today. So we are so grateful to Carnegie for hosting us in this beautiful space. A few housekeeping notes for you to get us started. First of all, we are recording this and it'll be available online afterwards. Second, please do take this opportunity to silence your cell phones. I believe there's Wi-Fi information available if you're having difficulty with getting connected, and you will want to be connected and keep your phones handy because during the panel, we will be taking questions from you all via the QR codes that you can find on your seats. So you have a little bit of time to get all of that squared away, but do keep that in mind for later on in the program. You also received packets when you entered that has a lot of great information in it for you. It has our agenda for the day, as well as our full list of AI Age members and participating electoral management bodies, or EMBs. It also has a one-pager with more information about AI Age, as well as a second QR code, not to confuse you, but that one will take you to a form to sign up to receive further information about AI Age in the months ahead. So you'll see on that agenda that we have a very full schedule today. So without further ado from me, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. John Bateman, who's Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and co-director of the Technology and International Affairs Program, to get us started.
Okay, great, all right. Hey, thanks everyone for being here. I guess in this sort of ceremonial role, I'm supposed to offer some wisdom and motivation for this event. I don't think that's really needed. I think people know why you're here. I think the most important thing that I can do off the bat is just briefly, but in a very heartfelt way, thank 4 different groups of people. First, the IFES team. Lisa Pajali, Tony Banbury, Catherine Murphy, the whole IFES team has such vision and energy in bringing this event together and this initiative at a very important time. Secondly, my friends here at Carnegie, Tom, Bella, the wonderful comms team, Emily, Mira, Charmine, and of course, Ed and Zach. An event like this doesn't come together automatically yet. We're still in the age where we need humans to do all of this incredibly important work. So big heartfelt thanks to them. Thirdly, the electoral management bodies and the members of this new AI advisory group that have taken the time to be here. This is not an easy time to be an electoral administrator or an AI expert. If you're in either one of those groups, there is huge demand for your energy and expertise. And so choosing to come and take part of this event and sharing with your counterparts on this other side of this important divide, I'm very grateful for that. And finally, for all of the guests who chose to show up today and lend your own support to this initiative. So you all know why you're here. Let me say a word about why you are here at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and why our institution is very excited to be a partner for this launch event. There's a very clear story, and I think we all know what it is. On the one hand, democracy is under stress and strain worldwide. And on the other hand, AI capabilities are rapidly advancing and diffusing throughout societies. This is a scary story for many. This is a concerning story. The causes are complex, and the interplay between these two variables, I think, frankly, we still don't fully understand. Even years into what is actually a long AI journey, right? Recommendation algorithms in search engines and social media, that already is AI impacting elections and democracies. But we're now moving into a new phase where generative AI is going to be increasingly used by all elements of this fight for and against democracy. The election administrators will be using AI in their work. Politicians and election workers and volunteers will be using AI increasingly to communicate and to run races. Forces hostile to democracy, whether foreign or domestic, will be using AI to augment their activities. And so I think many of us who are democracy lovers or promoters or protectors or researchers have frankly been in a defensive crouch for the last few years. We're worried about the state of affairs and the trajectory that our countries and the world is on. And it seems to us that anything coming along the way, like advanced AI tools, is just going to exacerbate these early negative trends. And I would just say my hope for this event is that we can somehow find a way to turn that story around. We can somehow make a reluctant peace with the inevitable advent of AI tools and think about how this group of people can actually use knowledge and technology to take back some initiative from the forces that are hostile to or opposed to or corrosive toward democracy, and actually think about how we can use these tools to fight the adversaries in a metaphorical way, but also uphold the important pillars that allow elections to function. So that's my hope, is that today we can remember a year or two from now as one of the moments where we started to turn this story around and seize back some initiative. And with that, I'm very excited to hand back to the MC.
Thank you so much, John, for getting us started. It is now my pleasure to invite IFES's CEO and President, Mr. Tony Banbury, to give some additional opening remarks and, importantly, introduce the members of AI Age. Tony.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Cassie. I should have just come up when John did and stood behind him, because everything he said was what I wanted to say. He just said it better. So I'm going to have to adjust my remarks and edit them down, because John, thank you so much for that introduction to exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. I am going to thank a few more Carnegie colleagues who were so instrumental in organizing this event, even if I'm repeating some of the thanks. So very much thanks to John, to Emily Vaughn, to Bella Wright, and to Mira Varghese for organizing it, and the other Carnegie colleagues who have contributed to this. Also want to thank the Rockefeller Foundation for funding this initiative, and we're joined here by Kelly Razouk from Rockefeller. And then, of course, my colleagues at IFES, who have been so creative and energized by this initiative and have been working for many months to bring it together. So Matt Bailey, who heads our digital democracy team, Lisa Poggiali, who leads this particular initiative, Catherine Murphy, who's been working on it, and Dr. Cassandra Emmons, Cassie. And then very much, of course, as John noted, want to thank all of you for being here, whether you're here in person or joining us online for this event. John talked a little bit about the challenges democracy has been facing for many years now. In fact, we're in this third wave of autocratization. We're all acutely aware of the challenges to democracy. One reason we understand them so well is because of Carnegie's own Tom Carruthers, who's one of the foremost scholars and writers in this field, and who we all learn from and lean on so much as we seek to grapple with what the challenges are and how to respond. Just to highlight a couple statistics to bring it into focus, though, some kind of sad statistics. Right now, almost 3 out of 4 people in the world, 72%, live in a country that is characterized as some form of autocracy. That's the largest number in decades, and it's just shocking to think that 3 out of 4 of our fellow humans live in autocracy. For the first time in decades, there are more countries in the world that are autocracies as compared to democracies. 40% of the world's population live in countries that are moving in the wrong direction, further towards autocracy, while only 6% of the world's population live in countries that are moving in the right direction, towards democracy, greater democracy. One of the issues at the heart of this challenge is reduction in trust that people have in their government. Trust that the government will meet the basic needs that people have: security, economic livelihood, healthcare, education for their kids. We all feel this, whether it's in the United States or countries around the world. And that's another characteristic or sort of shift in the context where in the past there was this sense that democracies in North America, Europe had sort of figured things out, and it was their responsibility to help countries in the global South advance on their journey toward democracy. Well, it's clear that countries in North America and Europe have not figured things out entirely, and it's clear that many countries in the global South are working in some very innovative ways to advance their democracies. So there's no repository of solutions and there's no repository of problems. We are all in this together, and the problems that are confronting democracies are common regardless of geography or income level, and it's so important for us to recognize that and shift our way of thinking about how we approach these problems of democracy. Excuse me. And then when we're facing all these problems, along comes AI. We've had such a big impact from social media and other technology on democracy, and now we have AI. Thank you very much to add to our challenges, just what we need at this moment in our history. But as John said, we need to sort of seize this moment. It's not a time to pull back and hide in a crouch. We need to be very proactive in thinking about how AI is going to impact our societies, and in particular our democratic processes, democratic institutions, and harness it in a way that will advance them and strengthen them and build more resilience, more than AI will be used to undermine them. The impact of AI on democracy is going to be probably nowhere felt more than around elections, trust in elections. And it's essential to bring together the communities working on these issues. For IFES, as an organization, we are a democracy organization. We work a lot on elections, but we work on important issues related to elections like campaign finance, electoral corruption, electoral dispute resolution, inclusion, the promotion of the idea that every person, every group has equal opportunity to participate in the electoral and political process of their life. And we work on digital democracy, as we call it, which is an umbrella for a lot of issues. As part of that work, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of electoral officials, election administrators. And as John said, if you're in those shoes, you have a lot of responsibilities. It's a pretty scary world. And even before AI, they were overwhelmed, under-resourced. Now AI is coming at them like a freight train. And we need to find a way to help those election administrators in countries around the world. So as we have been thinking about how to best to do that, our digital democracy team, led by Matt Bailey, has grabbed this idea of bringing together the election community and the AI community, not the Silicon Valley, American technology, and American policymaker AI community, but the global AI community and the global election community. There's a lot of talk in the United States and Europe about AI and even democracy, but far too often voices from around the world are not present in those conversations. And this initiative of the Advisory Group on Elections is meant to address that real gap and create that international conversation around AI and elections. Clearly, AI has the possibility of being a huge asset to election administrators, but it's by no means certain that that will be the case. It is almost certain that AI is going to negatively impact the work of election administrators around the world. So how can we, as a broader community and a global community, make sure that election administrators from around the world have the best possible opportunity to use AI to strengthen elections and build trust among the voters in their countries on elections. And at heart, that's what this is meant to do. And as important as AI is, what this initiative really has to offer in a way is building a social network. Social networks in the end are more powerful than technological networks, and creating this global social network of AI experts and voices and election authorities and civil society actors committed to working with them is the real strength behind this initiative. And we're extremely fortunate to be joined by the members of this new AI advisory group on elections, some of whom are here today, some who are online, and I'm very grateful to them. And at this stage now, I'd like to introduce the members of this new AI advisory group on elections. And I'll start with our election management body colleagues. And I think they're my good friend Betty Ipslan Idrus, who is from Indonesia, the commissioner at the General Election Commission, or KPU of Indonesia, whom IFES has had the great privilege of working with in a number of different contexts. So Betty, thank you so much for joining this initiative and joining us today.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.
Next, from our election management colleagues from the Central Election Commission of Ukraine, another close collaborator of IFES, is Vladimir Peripuluk. Vladimir, thank you so much for joining this initiative and being with us today.
Thank you for inviting to this initiative.
Thank you. Next is James Lee, who is a section chief in the Department of Electoral Affairs of the Central Election Commission of Taiwan, and he's representing the member of the advisory group, Dr. Xiaolin Wang. James, thank you for being with us.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, we would like to extend our sincere gratitude to IFES and the Carnegie Endowment for the international peace, and along with all co-founders for the invitations. So we eagerly anticipate cooperating with all of you to move towards a more intelligent and a democratic future. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And then the last representative of election authorities joining us today is Purti Karimi Njeri, who's a member of the Communications and Corporate Affairs section at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC of Kenya, representing the CEO of the IEBC, Marjan Hussein Marjan. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, and the Commission appreciates and is excited to be part of this group. And we acknowledge that elections have its own challenges and complexities that are unique to each environment. So we look forward to learning and looking for opportunities through which we can use AI to improve on election administration so as to increase transparency and integrity in election management. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and please give our regards to Marjan, CEO Marjan, who I understand is in Mecca, which is why he can't join us today. Next, I'd like to introduce all the members of the AI Age, and they will join us as a group online, and I'll introduce them one by one, and they will wave when I do. So first, Jean-Remy Demaistre, the co-founder and CEO of Juice Mundi and Juice AI. There's Jean-Marie online. Next, Shabanaz Rashid Dia, who is Executive Director of Tech Global Institute. And then next, Lindsay Gorman, the Managing Director and Senior Fellow of the Technology Program at the German Marshall Fund. Lindsay, thank you. Dr. Sam Gregory, Executive Director of Witness. Next, another good friend of IFES, Samson Itodo, who's the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. I think Samson's there, I hope. Next, Claire Leibowitz, head of the AI and Media Integrity Program at the Partnership on AI. There's Claire. Next, Sujata Mukherjee, Senior Director of Customer Experience and Trust Production at Upwork. Thank you for joining us. Next, Benjamin Prudhomme, Vice President of Policy and Global Affairs at MILA, Quebec AI Institute. And then finally, we're extremely privileged to be joined today and have as a member of this group, Audrey Tang, who is well known globally, who's the currently cyber ambassador at the government of Taiwan and a leading international voice on issues of AI and society. Thank you, Minister Tang, so much for joining us. And then finally, present with us today, we have Miranda Bogan, who is the founding director of the AI Government Lab at the Center for Democracy and Technology. And then Nanjir Sambuli, non-resident scholar at Carnegie. Thank you for joining us. And then finally, Katie Shea, the principal of Open Water Strategies. So those are the members. Very impressive, as you note, coming from the global, representing such a range of global voices, which is going to be one of the real great strengths of this initiative. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Cassie for the rest of the program. And sorry, finally, I also want to recognize and thank our board chair, the IFES board chair, Peter McPherson, former administrator of USAID, for being here. Thank you, Peter. Cassie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you everyone for joining us online. It's a pleasure to see everyone on screen together, if not also in person. If everyone can now turn their attentions back to the screens, we're actually going to hear from one of our other AI Age members, Shabanaz Rashid Dia. She is Executive Director of the Tech Global Institute. Dia has worked across industry and civil society on AI-related issues and has also supported the work of electoral authorities around the globe. So she'll provide a few brief remarks to get us the stage set for our panel discussion that will follow.
Everyone, thank you for having me at the launch of the AI Advisory Group on Elections. I've long followed IFES's work in this space, and this initiative could not have come at a more critical time. I'm very excited to join a stellar cohort of people in the advisory group and bring voices from the margins and the global majority to the forefront of AI policy discussions. I'm sorry that I could not be here today with all of you, but I'm sure we're going to be leaning on the incredible brain trust of this room as we're shaping and thinking through how AI can be used in elections worldwide. Increasingly, and especially in global majority countries, we have been witnessing how governments are partnering with tech firms to design demographic systems and citizen databases and biometric IDs to manage voter rolls. This centralizes sensitive citizen data, increases the risks of surveillance, vendor lock-in, and abuse. At Tech Global Institute, we have been monitoring and documenting the use of digital public infrastructure and digital election technologies in determining how voters exercise their rights and what these technologies mean for how democratic values are being shaped in different economies. With well-documented risks of data breach, bias, exclusion, disinformation, and surveillance, there is an urgent need for strict human oversights and audits for any AI systems in electoral contexts. In recent years, discussions on safeguards for AI in various public functions, especially elections, have been framed as a tension between regulations and innovations. This is fundamentally a flawed premise. Research has repeatedly found that robust regulations can actually trigger innovations in the public interest. KPMG's 2025 survey of 47 countries have found that trust in AI is strongly correlated with their independent oversight, and over 70% of respondents want stronger AI regulations. In global majority countries, AI policy is navigating tensions beyond just regulations and innovation. Some governments, like India and Singapore, are playing more prominent roles in incorporating AI across multitudes of public functions, justifying it as means to tackling Western AI hegemony. In Pakistan, Malaysia, and Philippines, for example, countries are taking a more protectionist position, encouraging local AI development for judicial and electoral context, often behind closed doors, with fewer safeguards and less oversight than what the international community can demand of larger AI companies more in the public view. In our work and engagements with policymakers, civil society, and election monitoring bodies, we have recommended 3 necessary safeguards when assessing the role of technologies, including AI, in electoral context. First, transparency is critical. We urge policymakers to uphold their public oversight mandate through disclosures of methodologies for training data and system architectures. Procurement needs to be centered in open source mandates and civic review and include participatory and transparent vendor selection. Citizens must have recourse for misuse and breaches. Second, human rights impact assessments needs to be incorporated throughout the product life cycle because this guarantees independent audits that can check for harms, bias, privacy issues, and democratic impact. Election monitoring bodies and those in decision-making capacities should prioritize, strengthening the capacity of electoral staff while making an effort to push back on technologies that prioritize efficiency and speed over safeguarding democratic rights. Third and finally, we strongly recommend involving election observers, civil society, and watchdog networks in the decision-making process and audit cycles to ensure accountability and inclusive design and in the deployment of technologies. We're at a very pivotal moment today. Coming out of the mega year of elections in 2024, democratic and progressive values are under increasing threat, and global tensions are shaping critical debates on technology governance, from data rights to AI. In the midst of these very high-level discussions, it's easy to lose sight of what's at stake: people's lives, their rights, and their futures. We, as people who occupy important rooms and spaces like this one, have a responsibility to bring the conversation to what matters most, ensuring that technology serves people, not just corporations or states. As someone who has been denied the right to vote under an authoritarian regime for the last 16 years, I know firsthand that there is nothing more important than protecting the right to vote and ensuring that technology is used to empower that right, not to suppress or distort it. I'm looking forward to working with this phenomenal group of experts at IFES and the advisory group to focus on human rights and safeguarding democratic values in the use of AI and elections. Thank you again for having me.
For laying out so clearly the challenges before us and also posing some potential solutions that we can explore further with our panelists. So as a reminder to those in the room, if you have questions for our panelists throughout the discussion, excuse me, you can submit them via the QR code that was around on the seats. And for those of you joining online, you can feel free to submit questions in the comments section under the video. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce IFES's actual Digital Democracy Advisor. I was so excited to introduce her that I gave myself her title at the beginning, Dr. Lisa Poggiali.
Thank you so much, Cassie. And there is nobody I would rather be a double of than you. So thank you so much to all of you for coming. And I'm going to sit down now, actually. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I am incredibly pleased to be here today with this esteemed group of AI experts. We will introduce them first a little more robustly than Tony did, and then we're going to have a conversation about their expertise and what it is that they think we should be focusing on over the course of the next year with this AI advisory group. So I'm very pleased to introduce Miranda Bogan, who is all the way at our end there, who is the founding director of CDT's AI Governance Lab, where she works to develop and promote adoption of robust, technically informed solutions for the effective regulation and governance of AI systems. She's an AI policy expert and responsible AI practitioner and has led advocacy and applied work around AI accountability across both industry and civil society. Then next, we have Katie Shea, who is the principal of Open Water Strategies. Katie is a human rights and tech expert with over a decade of experience leading human rights and AI initiatives at Cisco and Yahoo. She is now launching Open Water Strategies, a consulting practice focused on human rights, AI governance, and responsible innovation. And then last but not least, Nanjira Sambuli, non-resident scholar at Carnegie, right here. Nanjira is a researcher, policy analyst, and strategist studying the unfolding gendered impacts of digitalization on governance, diplomacy, media, entrepreneurship, and culture. So basically everything, especially in Africa. And she's a non-resident scholar and previously a fellow in the Technology and International Affairs program at Carnegie and a Ford Global Fellow. Thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to start out, I mean, it's clear that you come to this conversation from very diverse points of view. Katie being a lawyer, Nanjira being a scholar, Miranda having actually been in a tech company as a tech practitioner and now focusing on governance. And one of, I'll say, just to frame, that one of the founding kind of visions for this group was to bring a very diverse set of AI expertise to the table, to have a sustained conversation with electoral officials. So from the technical side, policy, advocacy, everybody coming together to sit down at one table. From where each of you sit, what do you think the value is, or what do you think why is this moment so important for this kind of a group and this kind of approach of bringing electoral officials together with a diverse range of AI experts? I'll start with you, Nanjira.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I was just thinking about the fact that we had 2024 as the super election years, and we've sort of crossed that tide and now has entered this new phase, so to speak, where everything is happening all at once. I think this could not be more opportune in the sense that I think for the first time, or maybe in a global scale, nobody has the answers. I think you alluded to that, and we're going to have to learn from one another. There's a humility that everyone, regardless of expertise, of lived experience, or technical expertise, is going to have to bring to the table, because there's never been a time where we've had all the instruments we could need to get ourselves forward as people, and felt like we're getting further and further away from the visions of democracy and tech utopia, so to speak. So this is really opportune in that regard. And I'll bring it closer to the fact that some of the most interesting elections will be happening in the next 5 years around the world. Again, we've just done 2024, now comes 2025 plus, and now we'll have artificial intelligence and the role of tech coming up quite a bit in the event that is elections, but there's also the process of living through the in-between events and what that means and what these technologies do to help or hurt the trust that they would be assigned in how they play out in electoral management.
Right. Yeah, so in my career, I've worked most recently in technology companies, but before that I also worked in civil society. And throughout, I've really witnessed the benefit of bringing a multi-stakeholder approach to the development of frameworks and governance. And so what I think is really valuable about this initiative is bringing together people from different geographic perspectives, as well as different lived experiences, you've said, and different ways of approaching common problems. So to have people with a technical background, a legal background, a government background, or policy background, to share and learn from one another and co-develop solutions, I think is extremely valuable. When we think about applying a human rights perspective to AI governance, a key component of human rights due diligence is stakeholder engagement. You have to hear from the people who are going to be impacted by the decision making. And so I think especially bringing Global South voices to this conversation to complement other discussions that are happening in major policy centers in North America and Europe will come with better solutions.
When I started working in AI policy, it was called big data, and then it was called machine learning, and then it was called AI, but it meant something else. And then 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, generative AI kind of burst onto the scene, and even my job changed dramatically because the technology underlying the products that people were building was also changing dramatically. And the major shift that is most important in kind of understanding the way the impact of this technology is evolving is that it used to be that AI systems were being developed for a particular purpose. And in order to make it work in that context, the people building it had to understand what it was they were building for. And even then they didn't do it very well, but at least it was sort of part of scoping and design. And now what people are pouring, billions and billions of dollars and, months and months of time into is building general purpose tools and then testing them to see if they work and how badly they fail in different contexts. But they won't know if their tools work or how badly they fail in contexts if they're not talking with contextual experts. And I find in many cases they are not talking to those contextual experts. So I think that's where bringing these communities together is absolutely critical, because it's so important to bring experts in the domain of elections and democracy together to say, what would it look like for these systems to fail? How will they actually be used in practice rather than in the imagination of developers in a room if they're thinking about it at all? And I think by facilitating that interaction, we can start building some of the technical tools as well as the multi-stakeholder infrastructure to channel that feedback back to the developers, because otherwise they're just going to keep pushing forward. And it moves so quickly. My head spins every day trying to keep track of the latest development in the technology, let alone trying to do the thinking and analysis about how those changes will affect any number of domains. And so having a broad enough group who can kind of spot some of those different pieces of the ecosystem is absolutely critical.
So I want to pick up on a thread that you started to pull, Miranda, which is just how diverse AI actually is. I mean, when we talk about AI, we're talking about everything from, biometric ID that's driven by AI-powered algorithms, to social media, which is driven by AI algorithms, to built-for-purpose tools that could enhance the ability to detect coordinated and authentic behavior and disinformation. So there's just such a wide proliferation of different technologies and tools that we are lumping into one sort of very abstract category, right? And then not to even mention, the large language models that are so powerful now, and the race to develop artificial general intelligence. So how can we think about how to grapple with this kind of layered complexity of what AI is, and then also the different elements of any AI tool? Like you have the application layer, you have governance structures, you have like different components. The back end and the front end, when we're thinking about any particular form of AI. What are some ways that you think we should be thinking about when we're giving guidance to electoral officials on how to integrate some of these technologies, and also how to ensure that we're safeguarding the technologies from harms that may come to the population or the electoral process itself?
The way I like to think about AI is basically any technology that's built to detect and replicate patterns, detect or replicate. And as we see generative AI, there's a lot of replicating patterns, but AI is also about just simply detecting them. It used to be that dividing it into different categories like computer vision or natural language processing or recommender systems or classifiers that were determining whether a piece of information fell into a category or not was a useful way to think about these things. And in some ways it still is. But in other ways, these categories are collapsing, both because there are systems that incorporate multiple different components, as you said, and disentangling those systems and understanding the components can be helpful in trying to think through what the impact will be. But also, the systems are beginning to incorporate all of those different characteristics or capabilities into one. And so we're thinking about LLMs, but even things people call LLMs today are actually what researchers call multimodal systems. So they can incorporate text and images and even video and produce sound. And so it is challenging to think about all of it because, in fact, AI is sometimes everything. And it's just how might some piece of technology be used to speed up a process that's otherwise happening. And so the way I find it helpful to think about these things is, what is a given tool trying to do? What is it outputting? What actions is it effectuating? And then you can start to dig into the layers to say, how was it trained? What is its goal? What policies surround it? What safeguards have been implemented? But starting from in what context have we integrated this system, and what is it touching can help ground that conversation in reality, because otherwise it's such an abstract conversation, it's difficult to grasp and feel agency and actionability around.
Can I pick up on that? I think a way of thinking about it is sort of like, what are we trying to do here, right? Like, what's the purpose of this? How is it being applied to what end? And what we do in a human rights due diligence approach is we look at what are the potential benefits to human rights and what are the potential risks, and then how do we mitigate those risks. So if we start with a set of principles or values that we want to advance in an electoral system and to leverage AI in order to advance those values and principles, how would a particular application do that? Who would be impacted by it positively or negatively? And then you get into more of the how than the what. But getting into those deeper layers is also important, as you've said.
But sometimes when trying to do that even initial mapping, I've been a participant in human rights impact assessments trying to spot the technical challenges. And it can be like asking a question of, what are the harms that you can imagine in the world? And until you have a better, clearer sense of what are the tools that are being built, to be able to map how that will actually affect people in their day-to-day. It is a quite greenfield whiteboard exercise, and drilling down in both directions, I think, is important. So again, back to having multiple folks together can start to hone in on a coherent set of challenges.
And I think in the context within which, and especially in this case, every electoral management body, mapping what are the processes that they actually oversee and what are the technologies they already use, could use, and will be thinking about using. And also because the scope will be so important for what they can do before they take on the entirety of everything from data protection to harms assessment and everything. I think a mapping exercise for every context, and mapping in a sense that is also not just abstract in terms of principles, but thinking about them. When you say transparency in any political context, it might vary big time. And so that will allow us to understand, we may sing from the same hymn book of principles and values, but when you map it within the political reality within which any system is about to be deployed or redeployed or used, hidden, whatever, I think that would be an important, urgent exercise to help us make sense of what are different countries or different perch points seeing with what technologies already have, and where AI, whatever version of AI it will be in this case, comes in. I think that will be very, very important, just giving us some clarification context around what is and what is possible and what isn't.
So you've picked up on the importance of understanding the tool itself and the objective of building the tool and the context in which it will be used. I want to drill down on one particular tool or technology that is used quite frequently for authentication and verification of voters in elections, and that is biometric technology, which is increasingly AI-driven in order to prevent fraud detection and the like. So there are different models, right, of biometric technology and how it's used, and different models for identifying and verifying voters that in some cases do not use biometrics, in some cases do. Nanjira, I know you have worked on digital public infrastructure quite a lot, of which I would say digital ID is probably the most prominent element of that in the conversation. What are your thoughts on, what kinds of questions should we be asking and should electoral officials have on their radar when they're thinking about choices to make regarding verification and authentication of voters? And of course, there's a lot of criticism of biometric technologies because of the potential for centralizing data and surveillance and all of that. And then there are also some innovative approaches that have come out of Estonia, for example, which we all know Estonia is the poster child for a lot of interesting innovations. But of course, we know we can't just take innovations from one place and plop them into another place and expect that they're going to function well. So this is not to say that Estonia is the model that we necessarily should be thinking about for many other contexts, but what are your thoughts on this question of biometrics?
I'll situate it with the experience that we've had in Kenya, where over the last decade, elections have been entailed tech being brought in, and it's always pitched as high, ultra-modern, and so on and so forth. And so biometric identification was introduced in 2013, and the idea was obviously that, yes, you'd have the biometric fingerprints, and on the day of voting, you can electronically be identified and so on. One, the assumptions are often that the system will figure itself out. And if you haven't mapped it in the infrastructure of whether you even have the electricity will be on to power the systems, I kid you not, to whether you actually have enough of the kits that will be needed. And this is the thing about tech, and the allure of tech as always bringing efficiencies, but within contexts that have not been mapped for the readiness. And so it was really been a failing forward environment. Of course, there will be people who have calloused hands, and so biometrics will not be possible for use. And so there are serious dynamics coming in there. But let me just share one that's particularly interesting to your point about criticisms on biometrics. There's a phenomenon I learned about when there were those pressure, especially outside of the electoral system, but within the identification systems authorities in Kenya, to register everybody. And when they could not meet those quotas because either it seemed as a forceful affair and so on, and a phenomenon emerged called a fingerprint salad. So I'll take 2 of yours and 3 of yours and create another person. 2 of you and 3 of you and create another. And somebody somewhere is going to have to sit and manually filter that data out. Now, let's bring it to an electoral context to think about what are the ways we think about values and safeguarding. If the interest is to say that I want to suppress voting by a certain community or a certain area, I could use such tactics to confuse the register, right? And to even, whether it's on the day itself or in the process leading up to that. So there are real risks that can emerge here. They really also just remind us that the very human process that determines how any of these technologies is used is something we mustn't lose sight of. Because any technology is only going to work as well as the intended intrinsic motivation to deploy it. Another phenomenon we've seen is where, I don't know if you guys have heard of a company called Tools for Humanity, AKA WorldCoin. And they've tested in Kenya, India, Germany, and elsewhere the idea of identifying folks using iris scans and creating a whole new other kind of biometric database so that they could, they say down the line, maybe do stuff like universal basic income and so on and so forth. But what was interesting about the WorldCoin case, and especially in Kenya, is they rolled out with their orbs in malls and so on. And there was this allure that you could get about $50 when you sign up. And we had this snaking queues around different parts of the country, and especially the city of folks registering. At some point, actually at a government facility, implying that they had gotten permission to actually do this. And then later on, that has gone to court, but this data had been collected. And there's a question of how will that data be used down the line? In the kinds of partnerships, shady ones sometimes that you hear about between governments and actors like that. The case currently is such that it was declared unconstitutional for the WorldCoin to have done that. The question is, where is that data now? Where does it sit? We're heading to an election. who, we don't know what procurement will be told, might be told we're voting with our iris, I don't know. Some real concerns around how these processes sometimes seem like you can neatly organize for them, but there are these strange events in between that then can culminate in this process. The outcome of which is, with these kinds of experiments, there is trust deficit now. The moment, say, I'm told to go and register again to vote, or new registration of voters is coming in, and this is something we're facing in Kenya right now, and the Electoral Commission will be facing this challenge, is everybody wants your biometrics for something in different settings. If in a country context, your health system requires you to do biometrics, then, your driver's license requires you to do biometrics. Then your electoral voter register requires you to do biometrics. Then you hear your biometrics are being spilled all over the place, so to speak. There's a trust deficit that then emerges there. So we're already seeing the limitations of going to ask people yet again to start, issuing their biometrics without understanding how they're used. How do you have, again, because Estonia was mentioned, situations where you have best practices where if a government comes to you and says they want your biometrics, the one-time affair, and they figure out other ways to identify you within the system. Is that the best practice that should be adopted? Or should it be that any private, public, and any other actor just collects your biometrics and one day you hope that it's still you, when you're showing up to vote or any other activity? These are the real theater beyond even just the technical aspects that complicate the use of such tech.
I think this concept of public trust is critical because, if people are going to participate in the political system, they're going to do it when they trust the system. And so we should be leveraging these technologies in order to enhance public trust and avoid situations where you could diminish it or validate concerns that the electorate may have. I also think your example about the calluses is a critical one. And in the use of biometrics, I think electoral management bodies should really be thinking about who might be excluded when we use this and what are the other options to achieve the aims of verification without excluding people unnecessarily, whether it's because of a callus on their finger or because they live in a more rural environment where they may not have access to the systems, or maybe they're a student, or whatever it is, more vulnerable groups that could be excluded just through the use of that technology.
And I think that's the case for any technology that's deployed in an electoral or sort of public interest context. I read a really fascinating brief article the other day, which was not related to AI, but it was what engineers think about flights, like engineers who are building flight-related software, just assumptions that they had. And assumptions included things like flights always leave from a gate. Like flights always have a certain kind of flight code that is attached to an airline. Flights always leave within 24 hours of when they were scheduled. Like things that when you kind of actually engage in that domain, you realize are not the case. And those assumptions end up breaking the system when you don't account for them. And so I think thinking about those edge cases is critical. And I think the public sector and governments ought to be and should be held to a higher bar for the specificity with which they go about that exercise. Companies tend to think about the general population, but that's generally like the average population. Governments, especially ones that are purporting to serve their citizens in a democratic manner, owe that to their citizens to actually serve everyone, especially the ones that are not in the sort of average and norm, and the ones that are will have the hardest time reaching the benefits and achieving the benefits that they're owed in that society.
So I think one of the really important things that you pointed out is that there are accountability frameworks or frameworks for understanding, frameworks for understanding how the technology will be used, and then how government agencies can be held accountable should they go awry. I think one of the things that we know AI accountability frameworks assume is that harms are in some way easily measurable, right? And you brought up the example before of, you can think of all of the harms under the sun with any particular technology, and that's not necessarily going to be a productive way of thinking about harms. But then on the other hand, there are harms that we could be thinking about 10, 20 years down the line, thinking about something like iris scanning, data being collected by WorldCoin, and who is it that's using that data, and we have no idea where it could go, who could be using it in the future. And so, Katie, I know you have done a lot of work on human rights impact assessments. When we're thinking about what frameworks to build into the electoral process, or what electoral management bodies can be thinking about at the time that they're starting to think about the, preparing for an upcoming election, and then all the way through after the election in kind of a post-mortem process. How should they be thinking about, the fact that they can't just, the harms aren't on the table that they can necessarily be thinking about in an easy way?
Right, and they're not always measurable like at a moment in time, as
Yes.
you said. So, I mean, my bias is I do think it's helpful to think about all the harms that could materialize under the sun, but I don't think you're saying that's not useful. It's about bringing it together, right? It's a challenge, but you have to bring it together. And you want to think about like what's the scale of the potential harm, what's the scope of the harm, like how many people could be impacted by this, and how likely is it to occur. That helps you do more forward thinking about like what could come up that we should be monitoring for. Whether it's a person who is excluded because they have a callus on their finger and so the fingerprint ID doesn't work. Like that's something measurable, and you need to have a process in place for making sure that that person still has access to the system. But other things that are harder to measure that may materialize over time are things like public trust and public participation and how power dynamics are shifting. And so the human rights due diligence and analysis should really be an ongoing process. It shouldn't just happen like before, during, and immediately after an election, but over time to be looking at how is the running of our elections impacting the broader society. I also think you have to look at this in the context of the broader information ecosystem, so things like censorship and internet shutdowns around elections are also, factors that may or may not involve AI in the running of elections, but that have to do with information that people have access to when they're making their decisions about how they participate, and you have to find ways to bring that in as well.
Just to quickly follow up, I know you have been in Cisco developing their responsible AI framework, or have developed it. You come from a business and human rights perspective. In many electoral contexts, human rights is not the first thing that people are thinking about, right? It's they want to protect, it's the citizens' right to vote. They want to make sure that elections are being managed in a good technical manner. They want to ensure that there's no false information circulating about the electoral process and their role in it and all of this on social media, but not necessarily thinking about human rights harms. So what is the benefit of a human rights-based approach or a human rights impact assessment framework, as opposed to the plethora of other types of assessments and frameworks that exist related to ethics or responsible AI, or pick your terminology. There's so many different frameworks out there right now.
Well, I like the human rights framework because I'm a human rights practitioner. But in my experience doing this work inside of a company, is we could kind of get like twisted up in circles talking about which ethical framework are we going to apply. And I think the benefit of applying a human rights framework is it's sort of a systematic way for thinking about actual impacts to people in the, if you just pull up the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and sort of go through it, like, okay, how can this human right be impacted by whatever decision we're facing, whether it's a decision about how to apply AI in election or something else. And it's just kind of a systematic way to go through and develop your list of things to be looking for. I have found it to be a very practical framework.
And I think not only are there so many different frameworks one could use to organize an impact assessment, there are so many different things people call impact assessments. There are audits, impact assessments, red teaming, evaluation of systems. And a framework I've found helpful to think about that is how broad and exploratory is your probing of a system and its integration into a process and the impacts it could have, versus how specific is it, and how independent is that evaluation of the people building it. And I think none of them are anywhere on those two spectrums are useful place to start that work, but are not going to cover the whole area necessary for accountability. So the people building the system, it might be important for them to do a few specific evaluations of a few measurable things if they know how to do that, because they're in a position to be able to do so. It might also be very important for an entirely independent third-party organization to do a more exploratory analysis over time of how harms that might not have surfaced in the development process are coming about, and you know, intermixed within that. But as we're thinking about accountability and how election officials and other public officials should be thinking about this, I think they need to kind of fill out that whole map of how are the folks who are developing this thinking through the harms before something is deployed, and as well as after it. How are they starting broadly with any kind of framework, whether it's human rights or other ethical frameworks, and drilling down to some more specific harms as they start doing that? How are they prioritizing among issues? Like, I think my challenge with let's imagine every harm is not that we shouldn't, but rather that after that, the prioritization exercise is often quite challenging, and I think some like frameworks like human rights and human rights impact assessments are helpful to do that prioritizing. But once you prioritize, then how do you drill into some of those harms? So I think that whole spectrum is going to be incredibly important as we think about spotting the risks that AI will pose.
So I'm thinking of it in the context of the electoral management bodies, and I don't imagine that they'll be building all the tech, but they'll be procuring quite a bit of it. And I think one outcome or recommendation right off the bat would be for them to demand the kinds of assessments that have been done by the tech that is procured. And I think of this especially where geopolitics come in, and there's the pressure, especially for global South countries, maybe to procure tech depending on the whims of geopolitics. And how do we make sure that that's a standard regardless of whatever whims however that tide might go, that become a requirement? And I'll give again a cautionary tale, because in the case of I think the last two elections in Kenya, again, high-tech electronic transmission and all of that, auditability became impossible just because of the lack of political will to make it possible. At some point when there were requests and demands for the data and everything around the process that was electronically managed to be audited or made audited, we found out that the data, the servers were abroad. Why would the government go ahead and, questions of localization of data in that context come up. And so we've learned a lot about how everything can go wrong, and the trust that is lost in the fact that that's a court case and you're told you cannot get that data because it's not in your country. You can imagine how that sullies a process. Why would I bother to show up the next time? I mean, I'll find other ways to exercise my right, or just, not believe in this process. So I think those could be really quick, important ways to show any electoral body, wherever they're going right now, whatever it is that they procure that is tech, whether it's data, big data, whatever they want to call it, electronic, the next generation, something or other, that demand could really elevate how these frameworks, whatever they are, actually show up in practice, because this would be a very particular use case in every context that allows us to understand what were the questions asked. Who else was brought onto the table, especially in the local setting, to probe if it's an international, non-local actor, and so on and so forth. Because my gripe sometimes with the frameworks and everything is it becomes theater. We're just running around framework 1 to B to C. We'll see you next week, and then follow up on the previous one, and it doesn't really show how it translates in these contexts. And it will be very important for these electoral management bodies to really situate it in the reality of every election that they're supposed to manage.
And this is talking about technology that is being proactively deployed, but I think electoral officials also have to think about technology that will be ambient in the ecosystem. So, last year, my colleagues and I were part of a project called the AI Election Project, where we were actually red teaming some of the publicly available generative AI systems for how they answered election-related queries, and found that I think 4 out of 5 of them were answering inaccurately and potentially harmfully at the time. Now, models continue to improve, especially as the contexts become clearer, but that's still a very grim statistic. And so understanding what external AI tools people might be turning to for information about elections, or for information about risks, or about their government at all, is very important, and creating the channels with the folks developing those tools is important, but they don't have quite as much leverage because they're not procuring it directly. But I think that gets to these broader questions about AI governance and some of the ecosystem that's kind of beginning to be built around the world.
Such a great point, that we need to think very small and then start to spiral out and think about all of the technical and then governance layers of the problem that electoral officials need to be equipped to understand and be able to respond to. So I want to now turn to that more macro level and talk a little bit about the governance piece. We all know there are many different conversations around the world happening right now when it comes to AI governance. We, of course, have the EU, which has a fairly developed framework with the EU AI Act. We have a process ongoing in the African Union related to AI governance, and every place has some AI governance related framework and process happening. What are some of the critical things that you think we should be thinking about if we're from the perspective of the elections community, not necessarily just electoral officials, but also citizens who are voting and electoral observers? Like, what are the key questions that we should be bringing to the major policy spaces where not just norms are being set, but also technical standards are being set around different AI-related technologies?
I think that we are seeing a lot of conversations around norms and voluntary guidance, and I think where we have to get to in all these efforts is anything that changes incentives, because while some companies are participating in things like the OECD and G7's Hiroshima principles, it was maybe 6 or 7 of the big global companies and a few Japanese companies, and that's just such a tiny slice of the ecosystem. And even then, no one quite knew what information they ought to be providing and what was going to be done with it. And so I think the next challenge is to figure out how do we take those principles and bring them more locally to create some more requirements, whether it's procurement requirements, whether it is technical standards, whether there are other commercial incentives that can be deployed, whether there are legal incentives. I think we're seeing the ways in which choices made in elections have a direct impact on whether there will be laws or governance at all around AI here in the US. And so there's this interplay, but that's the challenge ahead. And it has been like 1,000 flowers blooming, but also many weeds. So hopefully we can cultivate a few of those and turn it into something a little bit more robust.
And we know that, especially for global South countries, they go to the multilateral process to help make sense of all these initiatives, right from internet governance as sort of a tech governance, a global governance space, right to AI. And so it's been a bit interesting to see how they've tried to fit into the many proliferating initiatives around AI governance. And it ends up just being more about signaling maybe that you're part of the cool club rather than really being in a process that does allow a proper multi-stakeholder engagement process. And I think in this time when the world has so many different things coming at people, we must remember in these AI governance initiatives, especially that are exclusionary, so in a manner of speaking, that especially if anything that, whether it's the companies or a few countries, if they're making those decisions, because this is such rapidly diffusing technology, it's no longer just geographically bound. So how can we have processes that are inherently inclusive? And how do we especially understand how relevant those processes will be for countries that are thinking about this from a place where they don't have the capacity or even the visa access, to be honest, to be in some places where these initiatives are happening. So it would be a bit tragic to see an AI age for elections process starting separate from all the others that already exist, because who would it be for, and what's the capacity for these actors who are supposed to be represented, especially from governments that are struggling with capacity to show up. So I think that would be a very important thing before jumping on anything of that level, just taking stock of what they find are relevant or where they've seen their governments having capacity to represent them, to actually go beyond talking and actually take the incentive shifting. I think that's a really good way to think about it. And I think that could reorient us towards what really AI governance means beyond just hopping on planes here and there. Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're seeing an erosion of multi-stakeholderism in favor of multilateralism in the context of internet governance and tech governance. And at the same time, we're seeing like a real alarming absence of consideration of human rights in how AI is being developed and deployed around the world, as some of the companies are partnering with countries that have questionable records around human rights. And so I think we need to reconnect those concepts and really push for that.
I agree.
So this has been a fantastic discussion, and I'm going to now take some questions from the audience. Just a reminder that you can submit a question online if you're here. There's the QR code in your packet, so please go ahead and do that. So I want to turn to the issue of gender, which is one specific issue that is, has gotten a lot of attention in AI discussions for good reason, because I think one of the first major AI conversations, at least in this country, was around bias when we were thinking about AI and democracy. So what are the gender implications of AI in this arena? Do you see different impacts and issues for men and women? I would add people of all genders.
The expert.
But I'm a humble
first, but-
student of these realities. I actually hesitate to speak of expertise in that regard just because it's always evolving. I think so, and I think it could be everything from design. So sometimes we tend to think of gender assessments as how has it just impacted us at the point of interaction, but it's everything that comes before that. And I think that's why this process of how do we introduce a questioning of every system that comes to present itself as a solution is so important, because that's where we start to unpack what were the assumptions or lack thereof of who this was for, and how they were, going to be affected, and so on. And so the gendered aspect of this could vary in everything from the decision an electoral body will make around where they will put voter registration centers, could be everything from how disruptive of economic activity will be for a woman who's in the market to go and vote, or go register, spend 5 hours in a queue trying to register to vote, right? So these little things actually are more in the day-to-day granular aspects of how systems come to be, not just at the end final product when we're like, 48% versus 52%, or 30% versus 70% of one gender showed up to vote, because that's how the real theater of gender works. So really showing that even down to infrastructure level, to boundary delineation, that is a process that many electoral bodies have to do, is so important in how the gendered lens is brought into that. And gendered being just really a word for thinking about everybody based on what they are and how society treats them, rather than how it has come to be politicized today, and the contagion around that. I think that's the most important way to think about it. Of course, there's an impact, but it's at that level.
So yeah, you're pointing to the socio-technical elements of this challenge and issue, and I think all challenges and issues, we could agree. So we have a question that goes back a little bit to the global governance conversation. And the question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities of regulating AI across nations with different legal regulations? And I might add, feel free to bring it back to the geopolitical lens as well, because things are shifting so rapidly now. And Anjira, as you pointed out, many countries do go to the multilateral process to sort of put their foot in the sand, so to speak, and it's fairly unclear right now how things will go when it comes to I think voting in the future. At some point, we had a pretty clear idea of how different countries would vote on various global governance issues, and now it's a little bit more murky. So, what are your thoughts on that question?
So I think, while the initial conversations in the global context about AI were about human rights and governance, I think they've really morphed to how can AI be used to accumulate geopolitical power. And so I think we just have to see a lot of these governance efforts through that lens. In what way are they actually getting to the core of the harms that AI can cause, and in what way are they redistributing power between different countries and different companies? And I think an important point is that AI is not the same as the internet. The internet, there was an expectation that it was something that could be accessible by everyone across boundaries, and where there were legitimate challenges to how do you deal with something that is universally accessible, but where there are different governance regimes. AI models, it can be the case that there's a central one that's being served in a lot of places, and then you face similar challenges. But it can also be that there are models that are adapted specifically for countries, and that can be good to make sure they're linguistically capable. Right. They can, have contextual knowledge if we're talking about generative AI, so that they, work in that context. But that can also mean that the companies or developers working to build these tools are going to be subject to demands from the governments to shape them. And in the generative AI context, that could look like defining acceptable answers to queries about things like democracy or elections or history or things like that. Or it could relate to cross-border transactions with AI. I think the landscape will become more complicated again as these systems start to interact with one another. They've been mostly standalone consumer products or technologies embedded in particular processes. But I think there's a lot more entry points for governments to demand that their local laws are followed, which in some cases is a good thing, and in some cases can be quite a challenge, especially for human rights.
Thank you. We'll maybe have time for two more questions? Great, 2 more questions. So I want to bring it down to a very kind of concrete level. What actions can we take to change companies' incentives to create meaningful change? So going back to the conversation about procurement and even, I mean, part of one of the pillars of this initiative is to create more opportunities for and enhance existing local AI development that is civic-minded, that is in the public interest, and build capacity of electoral officials to be able to also engage with local AI development. Of course, that comes with its own set of challenges when we think about the political economy of AI related to, building the incentives. So, yeah, what are concrete actions we can take to change those incentives from big companies?
Well, I think one in the procurement context would be doing capacity building with the electoral management bodies to help them know what questions to ask in the procurement process and what they should be demanding of their vendors. They don't have to be AI experts, but we can skill them up on what they should be expecting and asking of companies. The incentives for companies are commercial. So they're interested in understanding what their customers are trying to achieve and helping their customers solve their problems. So I think that type of engagement can help get the issues on the radar of companies. But we as AI Age could also do more engagement with companies to sort of force them to think about how are these general purpose technologies potentially impacting the electoral process, and what could they be thinking about in the design of their products, and thinking about different use cases.
And even more concretely, especially at some of the newer AI companies that don't have as much experience working with civil society or thinking through these things, giving them that very concrete information, and even informing or working with some technical folks to build evaluations for what are the ways that these harms might manifest directly in a given general purpose system is one way I've seen companies be motivated to make a change, because now they have a tool they can use, and they might not otherwise have prioritized that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is, at the end of the day, a lot of these companies don't think they have to be accountable, especially to countries in the global south. They can always find workarounds. And so how that solidarity aspect is really brought in the fact that it cannot be, whether they're specific, like they just work on electoral tech or big tech or any other kind of space, that solidarity for actors they actually do show up to listen to make the case for the fact that, in some countries, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, for example, they have been summoned by, courts, by parliaments, and they've just not shown up. But they'll find, private-public partnerships that are tied to geopolitical interests to continue operating in some of these countries. So that completely bypasses even the will of the people around how they have exerted themselves. So really remembering that they're not necessarily being accountable right now in all geographies, and how we can creatively pressure them from spheres where they show up to do so.
Yeah, really powerful point. So I think the last question that we have time for is, election commissions have to make tough decisions about how to allocate limited resources. So, of course, we can talk about all of the different ways that we can build the perfect process, support electoral officials to themselves engage in the perfect process, but the reality is, there are very few electoral commissions around the world that have the resources to do that, whether it's human resources or financial resources, and obviously those two things are tied. And then, unlike most institutions, election managers need to maintain significant independence. So how can we build the necessary technical AI capacity, and how can AI Age build the necessary technical AI capacity among election managers to understand and manage AI solutions given the limited resources? What level of technical capacity is necessary? So this is in some ways a sustainability question of, the AI Age will be around for a certain period of time, but really electoral officials need to be able to manage the ever-changing dynamic landscape of technology on their own.
I think I'll step back, and my answer is that I don't know that in all cases we should rush to deploying AI in these systems, especially if there is not the capacity to know how to test them for the types of harms they might bring about. They do not always bring the efficiencies that they seem like they will. And so I think not starting with the assumption that it will be resource saving to deploy AI is going to be an important first step, and trying, like, the age can probably help identify where there are promising pilots and kind of capture learnings so that people don't have to pilot it everywhere independently and each thing at the same, over and over again. There's some economies of scale, but then again, the contexts are obviously very different across all of these electoral systems. And so I think that really seeing that if there is value before kind of leaning into building the technical capacity to deploy it immediately is going to be key. But I think then the capacity is needed is not only technical, but the socio-technical to understand how do we integrate this into the context in which we're building, not just how do we know how to procure a system that's likely to accomplish a task that seems like we need to have done.
I think the most important capacity is delivering a credible, free, and fair election. Listen, if it's pen and paper that's going to do it, do that.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, democracy, people are really, even in places where it has not fully materialized, people do believe it's the best system for them that can actually help them determine how they can exist in the context that they are in. So I think the capacity is most important so that we're not caught up in trying to fundraise till kingdom come and have ridiculous price tags around what elections will cost. Would be, what does it take with what you have to deliver a free, fair, and credible election?
Wonderful point. I'm going to end with just a very quick round robin of what would you say is one issue that has not gotten enough attention related to AI and democracy that should be put on the table for our AI age conversations? Miranda.
I think that this question of sovereign AI is oft talked about and little explored, and I think it has dramatic implications for what democracy actually means. So I'd like to see some more unpacking of that, although that's like a little bit in the broader landscape of AI and democracy.
Yeah, I think we've touched on it today, but just the sort of holistic nature of this ecosystem, the information ecosystem, and the public trust in democratic systems.
Just that it still ties back to things that do create pressure even in the analog, right? Things like land, water, and what the AI demands on that are, and mapping what that could mean. So in the near and long term for every context, the fact that if you're determining that there's more AI in, means some people are going to be pushed from one area where they consider their voting region to another. And what those, that meta picture will look like for democracy going forward is very, very important.
Very good point. Well, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. This has been a fantastic and dynamic conversation, and let's all give them a hand. I will turn the floor back to Dr. Cassandra Evans.
Okay, great. Thank you once again to our panelists, our moderator. That was a fantastic discussion. As we heard from them, AI is not any one thing, and we can't productively engage with it unless we understand and recognize the diverse ways that it's built, but also the diverse ways it can be applied and used. So we are fortunate that AI Age includes a number of technologists, one of whom is Audrey Tong, currently serving as Taiwan's cyber ambassador. In her previous role as Taiwan's first digital minister, she spearheaded an initiative that leveraged technology, including AI, to do a number of things: strengthen democratic resilience, enhance civic trust, improve service delivery to citizens, and advance government accountability. She joins us now from video from Taiwan.
Time. I am Audrey Tang, Taiwan's Cyber Ambassador and First Digital Minister. Although the dictates of scheduling keep us oceans apart for today's launch of AI AGE, please note we could not be closer at heart when it comes to making this game-changing IFES initiative a sparkling success. It is no secret that democracy is facing unprecedented challenges worldwide. Those in the pay of authoritarian forces are undermining electoral processes, weaponizing AI, and employing our societal strengths against us. In Taiwan, we face this reality day in and day out. But through pro-social media and the fast, fair, fun messaging, we are accelerating decentralized democratic defense in the digital age. Now, a vertical zero-sum race toward technological singularity leaves everyone behind. But with a horizontal grassroots movement of plurality, technology becomes a win-win ally. Freedom and security are not a trade-off, but rather a deepening of democracy. The stronger our civic muscle, the greater our resilience and ability to withstand societal threats. Last year, half of the world population went to the polls. Many face insidious efforts to sow division and discord, often amplified by foreign interference. In Taiwan, we formulated something fresh, pre-bunking and explaining manipulation tactics. This effective engagement created antibodies of the mind, resulting in a robust psychological response to falsehoods. And there was no need to resort to censorship. Media competency and the humor over rumor philosophy proved just what the doctor ordered. We all recognize that AI has immense potential, but it also presents profound challenges. Deepfakes, echo chambers, precision persuasion attacks that can undermine public trust and fuel polarization. A democratic approach, not a technocratic one, is optimal for addressing this ethical and societal conundrum. Co-governing AI hand-in-hand with the people through alignment assemblies, citizen panels that guide AI policy is a strong step forward. All voices should be heard when deliberating on related regulation and ethics. It is crucial that AI is trained to serve the greater good, while unlocking our collective wisdom and building a more accountable and participatory digital society. Taiwan's experience proves that democracy can evolve just like apps and software, with bridging system turning our uncommon ground into common knowledge. We can, in the wise words of AI AGE and IFES, build resilient democracies that deliver for all. In closing, it is a genuine honor and a privilege to be part of AI AGE. I wish everyone involved with the group the best of luck, and I'm certain that our collective efforts will enable us to stave off democratic encroachments. And rest assured, no democracy is an island, not even Taiwan. And so, in embracing collaborative and democratic intelligence, we can free the future together. Thank you for your kind attention and time. Live long and prosper.
Ambassador Tang highlighted for us what's possible when technologists, civil society, and government work together to develop creative solutions to governance challenges. As mentioned earlier, one pillar of AI Age is focused on elevating civic-minded AI innovation. Communities of AI developers who are invested in building tech in the public interest exist all over the world. And Taiwan has been an incubator for quite a few of them. So we're thrilled today to be able to feature the work of one of these groups, Doublethink Lab. Doublethink Lab is a Taiwan-based civil society organization dedicated to strengthening democratic defenses against authoritarian information manipulation. They developed an AI-powered tool to detect, analyze, and respond to information manipulation. And they built this tool in order to overcome the challenges that they faced in their efforts to improve Taiwan's information ecosystem. Let's take a listen to how they describe those challenges and the solutions that
information manipulation at scale. Doublethink Lab identified 4 key challenges.
You need to know what keywords to input, but you only know after you find a case. We do still have this, but it is too limited on its own. Imagine if you had a definable set of key personas that are targeted by an adversary. A rough version would group society by political leanings, although personas should be more specific. We simulate social media accounts of these personas. The algorithmically recommended feed of these accounts then surfaces the content they are actually seeing during a critical time, such as an election. We have developed an approach to filtering and predicting which content will be relevant to FEME by injecting knowledge of the strategic context into a machine learning classifier.
The classifier is trained on 5 years of monitoring PRC tactics in Taiwan. It flags narratives linked to strategic goals, such as undermining Taiwan's military or eroding public trust.
We have developed algorithms that look for coordination and inauthenticity. For example, indicators that accounts are created or operated in batch or generating copy pasta. In order to solve the 4th challenge, we have wrapped this more complicated and code-intensive part in an AI agent. Users can simply execute the code and analyze the outputs with natural language commands, eliminating any coding requirements.
Doublethink Lab's work is a good example of a socio-technical approach to addressing information manipulation. This kind of approach could be particularly useful during election processes, and we're really excited about the potential of incubating partnerships between civic-minded public interest technologists and elections stakeholders around the world. We've had a very rich conversation already on a wide range of AI-related issues. And so to highlight some of the key takeaways and talk about where we go from here, it is my pleasure to introduce IFES's Senior Cyber and Information Advisor to the stage, Mr. Matt Bailey.
Okay, hi everybody. Can I see a show of hands who's feeling totally clear on the boundaries of AI? Likely future trajectories. Okay, 0. I saw 0 hands. I have the unenviable position of trying to summarize this very robust discussion. I kind of felt like AI and my thinking about it was exploded before my very eyes, particularly when Miranda started talking about the abstraction or the kind of the deterritorialization, the taking away of the localization of AI over the last few years. I went, oh my God, that's what I've been feeling. This sense that this word has gotten away from us and we don't know, is it still one thing? Is it 100 things? Where are they going? Why does nobody seem to know the answer to these questions? So I'm gonna try to summarize this quickly, but I wanted to also say I'm in the enviable position of being Lisa's non-AI avatar up here. And I just wanted quickly, before I kill the energy in the room, to thank Lisa and Catherine in particular for their vision and leadership on this event, but also on the initiative as a whole. Thanks as well to all of our panelists, of course to the AI Age members present and in absentia, to our EMB colleagues who've agreed to join the initiative, and to Carnegie, to Rockefeller, to Tony, and everyone else who's been involved. I'm really, really excited about where we're headed after this event. So we started with this point of Miranda's about the abstraction, this realm of abstraction that we're headed into. I know you didn't mean it this way, but we can start with the technology itself, that it's kind of, you can almost picture an exploded engineering diagram of the chips, the embedded AI chips, all the way up to AI avatars. and the algorithms that connect everything in between. But I also really appreciated the work that Nanjira and Katie were doing from different vantages to some extent in keeping us grounded in what actually is going to happen in the world in real terms, in real human terms, in human rights terms, but also my technocratic heart loved the point about what does this look like, what specific processes within an EMB, within an election management body, do these AI questions attach themselves to? We're talking about communication strategy, incident response, crisis communication. We're talking about the structure of the budget to make sure that you have the money that's needed to inform that capacity. We're talking about cybersecurity. We're talking about voter education. And if you have, let's say you have $5, which of those topics are you putting how many of those dollars on? And usually it's about $5. And so, I think that we have this fundamental issue that looks like a technology problem, these interfacing systems, layers, architectures, and we have to make sure, I've been saying in our work around the world that the elections community is kind of at this high school level as we talk about these issues, and we've got to be postdocs like tomorrow. So how do we possibly get there? But at another level, this is really a human discussion. This is a discussion about making sure not only that our global conversation, global governance conversation is directly informed by a multi-stakeholder approach from the grassroots level on up, but vice versa, and that we're not restricting ourselves to the traditional players. We're not restricting ourselves only to people who are already inside of the technology bubble, the technology policy bubble, people who already have fancy titles within elections commissions, or have well-funded grassroots or transnational civil society organizations. This is a place where many of the panelists made this point. We really need to focus on sort of the end user of democracy. We really need to focus on what does this actually look like? How does it actually play out as people are trying to navigate their lives? They're trying to, in Kenya, I was there for the last general elections. People were lined up well before dawn, carrying children, dressed because they had to go to work immediately afterwards. So when we start to talk about these questions, what is AI? How are these algorithms biased or not biased? How are they localized or not localized? What we're talking about is that person who's trying to figure out how to vote with calloused hands before they go to work for the day. That conversation, I was tempted to be very dramatic and do like a pause of silence for the missing voices, but you can picture it. That conversation is not happening today. So we need to get there via this sort of a technocratic approach, this multi-stakeholder approach, this abstract approach that recognizes the abstraction of the technology. But that's the point of intervention that we're really seeking. So I will, my last small contribution here will be a quote. I dug this up. So there's a guy named Mike Cooley, who many of you may not have heard of, but he's a co-founder of the thriving Journal of AI and Society. It's a good read in general. So he was an industrial designer, hands-on practitioner of technology in his day, but also an organizer in the workplace and this practitioner and this formulator of kind of what is human-centered technology, well before the D School at Stanford and RISD and everybody else caught on to it. And so he has a quote, I'm going to lightly paraphrase, but he says, "The future is not out there waiting to be discovered. It has yet got to be built by human beings, and we do have real choices, but those choices will have to be fought for, and the issues are both technological and political. We have to decide if we will fight for our right to be the architects of the future or be reduced to the roles of bees in a hive." 1980, he was saying this. Yep. So, he founded this journal. AI had a totally different meaning at that time, but the power dynamics and the questions of the technical design of our systems and the participatory design of our systems has not changed. We're at a moment of accelerating change on these issues. We're at a moment of opportunity and peril, as Tony recognized in his opening remarks. And as John said, I couldn't put it better, we need to take the initiative. So that's what AI Age is hoping to make a small contribution to. And my final point here is just a call to action. We need you. So the AI Age group itself is incredibly capacious and representative. I'm really proud to be in a small way associated with it, but it's really meant to be a conduit for networks and networks of networks, and especially those who don't have access to networks. So we need your help. If you're in a tech company, we need partnership in all the different ways that you can construe that word. We need your help to know where you're taking your tools, what are you hearing from your users, funding. Civil society, whether you're global or local, you know why your voice is needed. We need to make sure that we're not creating a bubble that's maybe slightly better than the last bubble. So please engage with us, please reach out. And finally, policymakers. I'll forget who mentioned this, any of our panelists could have. The policy discussion is robust and it's getting smarter, but it's missing those voices that I didn't hold space for just a moment ago. So please engage with us, and especially, you know where your spidey sense is going off, that the conversation's missing a voice. Let us help with that spidey sense. More specifically, as was mentioned earlier, if you visit the QR code that's in your packet, you can find the AI Age sort of one-pager website that we set up. There's a sign-up link there just for email. You can stay in touch. We'll be sending out regular updates about what we're up to and how you can engage and contribute directly. Lisa will be at IGF in Norway. Is that next week? My God. Lisa will take a 20-minute nap and then go to Norway. And then at TrustCon in San Francisco in July. Okay. And there will be a rolling set of places to engage. And these are really designed not as places for us to give speeches, but as consultative events. So please reach out. And if there's places you think we should be, whether that's Lisa, any of the AI Age members, the EMB participants, anyone, please let us know. Help us inform our decision-making about where the voices are that aren't being heard. So thank you so much. It's been a real honor to be a part of this in a tiny way. And I thank everybody for their participation in person and online, and thank all of our panelists and everyone who's participated to make this a success so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. He gave a lot of the thank yous I was going to, but one more thank you to all of us who joined online and in the room for this launch of AI Age, the Artificial Intelligence Advisory Group on Elections. Please do keep in touch in all of the ways that Matt mentioned. For those of you online, thank you once again. For those in the room, we do have lunch. So without further ado, again, because I won't keep anyone from that, you can navigate to the lunch space, the stairs next to where you signed in, or the elevators just in the hall. Go to floor 2, and there's a nice spread from Tate. So thank you all once again, and have a good rest of your day.